Hey YouTube, this is my Dust of Dreams spoiler review. If you don't want Dust of Dreams spoiled for you, click my spoiler-free review up above. Otherwise, let's go! Dust of Dreams, the ninth and second to last work in the Malazan Book of the Fallen by Steven Erikson. As I said in my spoiler-free review, I really liked Dust of Dreams. It is slow, I agree with some of the common criticisms there, but it's a good kind of slow because it really allows you to sit in some of the themes of the book, but also the series as a whole, and it sets up a great finale for the Crippled God. In thinking of the book as a whole, I wanted to go over what I think is a sly way Erikson is cueing the reader in to how they should think about the end of this series. It happens in chapter 11. This is Tehol saying, "This seems a messy conclusion to things, doesn't it? Little that amuses, even less that entertains. You must know I prefer to leap from one delightful absurdity to another. My last gesture on the Malazan stage should have been the highest of dramas, is my feeling. Instead, I taste something very much like ashes in my mouth, and that is most unpleasant." Erikson references that this is perhaps not the most exciting ending that people are used to, although I think it is a great ending, but that it will taste as ashes. Dust of Dreams particularly is a very sad book in a lot of ways, and its meditation, as I'll talk about later, is about basically elimination or extermination, which are pretty dark themes, and I think he's cueing you in with this Tehol quote that this is a dark tale. It's with a good purpose, I think, and we'll talk about that later, but it is a tough tale. And it's interesting the ashes metaphor comes back because Erikson uses this in probably the most famous poem that he offers in the whole Malazan Book of the Fallen, way back in Guards of the Moon. In fact, it's the first thing you read in this series if you're reading it. This is before even the prologue, so this is very purposely set out as a outline or mantra for the series. "Now these ashes have grown cold. We open the old book. These oil-stained pages recount the tales of the fallen. A frayed empire, words without warmth. The hearth has ebbed, its gleam and life's sparks are but memories. Against dimming eyes. What cast my mind, what hue my thoughts as I open the book of the fallen and breathe deep the scent of history. Listen then to these words carried on that breath. These tales are the tales of us all, again, yet again. We are history relived, and that is all. Without end, that is all." So again, with this quote in Dust of Dreams, I think Erikson is reminding us of that overall thesis statement of the Malazan world, that we are continuing to make the same mistakes that we have always made. And this tale is a tale of mistakes made again. There may be some victories upcoming, and in Dust of Dreams there are some victories, but overall this is humanity making the same mistakes again and again. So let's get into the actual story of Dust of Dreams. First off, as a side note, I want to say I think this book starts out fabulously. I forgot to mention this in my spoiler-free review. The opening 200 pages is fantastic. Really sets the stage well. I think the hard part is that it's a very short first act, 200 pages, relative to the rest of the 1,200-page work, where probably the first 200 and the last 200 pages are just page-turningly good. That leaves about 800 pages of sort of middle setup, which again is why that common critique that it's slow is there. But let's get into these main storylines. First of all, the Parish Greyswords. I love this storyline, specifically the very beginning when both with the Burned Tears as well and War Leader Gaul and the Parish Greyswords. We have this scene where we think the Volcando Empire is going to be able to out-scheme and that they're going to backstab these allies of the Bone Hunters, and this is going to be a main plot line through the book. And there's this whole scene where Erikson writes this so well, where we see, I forget their names, but the two Volcando, like the general and then the consort or chancellor, whatever his title is, are talking strategy and how they're going to outfox these armies, and they're so foolish, and how can they be doing what they are doing. And they lay out this whole complicated plan about how they're going to take down these two armies. And then, after that scene, and we're thinking as the reader, oh, these people are in trouble. And then we see Taxilian and Krugava have this discussion where they just pin the tail right on the donkey of these plans. Like, they know exactly what's happening. They're going to play them perfectly, and they do, and they just crush them. It's this great picture of the Malazan military might and the strength that these people have and how well drilled they are and how really intelligent the Malazans have been. When you think about it, we've always seen the Malazans up against incredible odds, and they're always the underdog because they're facing gods, usually literally. And so it's very interesting now that they're facing these regular countries. We're used to them being backstabbed or being in a hard place, and then we see that just their complete excellence and they crush them. I love that. Let's go back to the Empire of Lether in the capital city. I love the whole sequence leading up to and having the reading of dragons, the deck of dragons, Fiddler reading the deck of dragons. It's so suspenseful. It's so well told and kind of leads us there from the mystery scene where we don't know who's getting arrested, and then it turns out to be Fiddler. Why is Fiddler getting arrested? Because he doesn't want to read this deck. And that the power is gathering. And then we also see it through Mael's perspective, who's nervous about it. It's so cool to see all of the sort of strings that we've seen before come together to form this really powerful scene. And the scene itself is very, very interesting. Like usual with the deck of dragons, as I was reading it, didn't really know exactly what was going to happen at all, but was energized by it and really excited because I knew that when I looked back on it, it would make sense that oh yes, Queen of Darkness, okay, oh yeah, Mason of Death, Hedge, all the stuff, sort of the pieces fell in place, but in the moment they don't. I love the whole mechanism of the deck of dragons. I imagine this is going to be the last reading we get. I can't think there's going to be time for anything in Crippled God, but I loved it, and it continues to be one of my favorite unique elements of the Malazan world. So from this discussion, we get a little peek into what we're going to do for the rest of the series. The Bone Hunters are going to go over the wastelands, which seems to be a really hard task, to go to a place called Kolans. There, they expect to meet the Forkal Assail. Quick Ben lets us into this. In his discussions with the adjunct, they're going to open a gate, and they have to do that by gathering a lot of blood. All of that is sort of unknown, except that the Crippled God seems not to be involved in any way, and Quick Ben seems to mention specifically that this isn't about the Crippled God. He's been playing defensively, and he's been losing, so it's very interesting that this whole time I've been thinking the Crippled God, really since Memories of Ice, I've been thinking he's the ultimate big bad, and he has done some terrible things, obviously with the sword, a lot of stuff obviously with the Crippled God, but it seems that the Forkal Assail might be the big bad, or actually probably in real Malazan style, there's probably no big bad. This is just a continuing series of events that happen around the time the Crippled God is waking up. I think that's most likely. But so that to get back to our main storyline, the Bone Hunters are going to go confront them, and this seems like a big task. We don't know a lot about the Forkal Assail yet, except for that brief hint we got in House of Chains with the Forkal Assail that Karsa accidentally frees. So we'll see. Seems bad, seems tough, and that's really the storyline of the Bone Hunters throughout the rest of the book. Also, Briz Benedict, continue to really like him and his storyline and this interesting aspect of him coming back from the dead. Solid, very good. Also, one aside, I really love the storyline of Hedge now being called Dead Hedge, and that he has sort of become as captain, I think that's his unit or rank now, of his own unit, and he's really making it like the Bridge Burners 2.0, even down to they've run out of their Moranth munitions, so he finds an alchemist to start trying to make new explosives. That's just a really fun storyline in the midst of all of this craziness that I think is great. Another important thing happening out of Lether is Shurk. That's how I say it. I'm not sure exactly the correct pronunciation. The woman who is dead and is now alive, and who is now basically a hedonist and a slave to her desires, just to keep herself interested in life because she's dead, which is a very interesting, I think, statement on life Erikson is making. But she is tasked with bringing one of the princesses of the Volcando Empire and her mistress, who both seem to be magically inclined, back by way of the sea. And this seems to be a dangerous proposition. Bug and Tehol are ruling. Tehol is trying to bring change, and there's a lot of very interesting conversations about the nature of change and how it can happen and how it can't. I really thought those reflections on trying to change a whole system was profound, and I really loved those discussions. But that's really all Tehol and Bug have. As I mentioned again in my spoiler-free review, we don't see a lot from Tehol now that his character has kind of reached his zenith of where it's going, and that makes sense. So I enjoyed the time we were there, but we leave him pretty quickly, especially when the Bone Hunters actually leave Lether. The Kalith storyline. This is a very mixed bag for me, because at many times I found myself slogging through the pages of this, but at other times it's incredibly fascinating because we haven't learned a lot about the K'chain Shamal. We've only seen them as basically these murderous, terrible machines of war, basically, and memories of ice, and then we see them at Red Mask's side, which is interesting that we learned eventually that we're looking at the same K'chain Shamal that we were then. And so now we're actually in their heads. We hear a lot about them, their culture, that they're on the edge of extinction because of their own civil wars and strife and wars with others, because they are these warring machines. They're not adaptable like humans, and so this last matron has decided that they have to reflect humans themselves to survive. And so that's why there's this Destriant, who's obviously a woman, always been a woman. Kalith, who herself has this very harsh backstory of being the last of her people, and so she sympathizes, obviously, with the K'chain, and I think they sympathize with her, and that's why there's this match, and she's looking for a shield anvil and mortal sword for the K'chain Shamal. And obviously she eventually finds them in Stormy and Gessler, which is a really, really cool ending to their storyline that's been going really since the beginning. I think Deadhouse Gates is when we first meet them. That kind of stuff is really interesting. The mythology of the K'chain is really great. I did find it long, hard to keep track of K'chain Shamal names. I don't know what it is about them. They just don't stick out in my mind as much. And telling the differences between the different types of K'chain, it just sometimes got a little difficult and got a little long. So that storyline is a mixed blessing, but I think obviously it has a big payoff at the end in the battle between the K'chain Shamal and the K'chain Naruk. So I think that ending really warrants it, even though if during the actual storyline in the middle it gets a little tedious at times. Speaking of tedious storylines, the Taxilian, Ghost, Feather Witch, the wandering spirits in the desert finding their purpose at the huge stone dragon fortress, that whole thing was really rough for me. I really did not enjoy any of it. To be honest, that in itself I think really brings this book down. Without it, I think it wouldn't seem so slow, but it just feels like it's dragging the whole time. Wasn't really invested. Taxilian, I kind of remember who he is. Some of those people, I kind of remember I've heard their names, but it just didn't grab me. Wasn't a huge fan of that. Maybe on reread, knowing what's going to happen with Akarium at the end, it'll be worth something. But even the payoff at the end of him helping with the Azath house, just wasn't enough to justify it. Another storyline that I think is going to be very important because of the time it gets here, but that didn't really grab me in this book, is the snake. The children, it's just brutal at the beginning, them, exploding from things eating them inside, and then they're having to eat each other to survive. It's just, it's so hard to read and not a lot to, again, grasp onto as far as narrative or character. Really, most of the wanderers in this book really, I think, drag it down. The Taxilian line, the snake, even the Triggled Trade Guild people and they're being stranded. A better storyline about wanderers is the Sheikh and their wandering, trying to find Karkanas. That also dragged and was difficult, but actually, surprisingly enough, Jan and Yadan actually really grow on me. I didn't like them much as characters in the previous books where we've seen them. Eventually, I really understood their plight, and again, I think the idea of extermination and doing the right thing for the future of your people is such a big theme in this book, Dust of Dreams. Their storyline makes a lot of sense and really unifies that. And of course the ending where Mother Dark comes back is so cool because it's so powerful in that storyline, but also because we have the background of what Anomander Rake did in Darujhistan in Toll the Hounds to bring those things together, and it's so powerful. So I loved that aspect of that storyline. So that sort of made it worthwhile, and I think it's definitely going to play a big role in the next book. So that did not bum me out quite as much as the Taxilian, Icarium, Snake storylines. I want to talk for a second about probably my favorite scene in the book, and that is the telling of basically the life story of Dead Smell before he gets into the Malazan army. So backstory of he grew up in basically a poor household. He eventually befriended a gravedigger and eventually took over for the gravedigger, but he had this profound experience with someone, a priest who died, and as he died, the god that he worshipped, which I think was Fenir, I don't remember exactly, doesn't show up when he died, and Dead Smell is so taken aback by the fact that this good man of faith who he admired and the whole village admired didn't warrant a visit from the god that he believed in. But the god who does visit is death, and he is somewhat morose in his duty of taking this soul to the realm of the dead. And so this builds this sort of antagonistic friendship between Dead Smell and Hood, this respectful repartee, and that's why he decides to be a necromancer, because that is the truest form of respect for death that he can think of, trying to thwart it at every pass. And this is a philosophy that Hood himself espouses. I think that is a gorgeous scene. Love it. So full of pathos. And of course, that is reflected on the fact that Hood has obviously died, or we the reader know, and Toll the Hounds he is soon to die. That just makes it that much better. It makes us root for Hood, I think, to eventually come back. There is going to be a coming back of that storyline of Hood. Is he really dead? And how that plays out in this particular story. Another key storyline here is the Elder Gods conspiring either with each other or against each other, or with and against each other. It's very hard to tell what. I love the whole... anytime we get a viewpoint from a god or goddess or ascendant that are thinking of sort of the higher eon level happenings, I love that. So the discussions between Kilimandros and the Eliant and Mael and all these other powers are discussing amongst themselves and plotting against each other. I think that whole thing is great. They're releasing something. Kilimandros at the end is releasing something, and we just don't know what that is. And I don't even know what side that's on. Is that on like a Crippled God's side of thing, this powerful being that is going to help him? Is it the Crippled God himself that they're releasing? Is it a Forquil Assail that is going to help the Forquil Assail? Is it someone who's going to be on the side of the Bone Hunters but be too powerful? It's very difficult to tell what is happening with that storyline at the end of this book, but I just really enjoyed that. Anytime you get to hear from the gods, great in my opinion. Also on that score, it's very interesting to see Bug and Mael be the same person, but not the same person when he's not with Tehol. Like, I don't think he's deceiving Tehol at all, but when he's acting as a god, he acts much differently than when he's acting as this human god. I think it's just an interesting dynamic to watch play out. And now we get to the tragedy of the white-faced Barghast. And I think this is the storyline on which this book revolves, and it is the storyline which the theme of this book really reaches its zenith in this storyline. But it is sad. And I do think Erikson is using the white-faced Barghast as a people to reflect the destructive tendencies that are in the real world seen in humans all the time. They are destroyed by a mix of wanton ambition, dark desires, lust, seeing power, and especially military power, as the most important aspect in living, the desire for wealth, exploitation of the weak, like chauvinism, male privilege, racism, just like all of the darker parts of humanity in our world find like a purchase with the white face Barghast in this book, both in the destruction and killing of Tool, and then ultimately in the worst scene so far in all of the Malazan Book of the Fallen, the Hobbling of Haitan. It's the height. I get chills in a bad sense thinking about it, because it is the worst scene in the series. It is awful. It is gruesome. I had to stop reading it at several points, set it down, and walk away from the book. I'm not a crier at all, especially when I'm reading. When I watch things, I do get teary-eyed pretty easily, but something about reading kind of usually I have enough distance where that doesn't happen, but not with this scene. I mean, it's just brutal, especially because of a character like Haitan, who we meet and is such like a bolt of energy and life. It's from way back in Memories of Ice, and we see her mature into this wife, and then to see this as her ultimate end is crippling. It just is. It is one of the most touching scenes in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. I have trouble talking about it. But ultimately, that idea of what we leave behind comes back again, because Tool is not allowed to rest. Talk sends him back, and he is now just full of wrath and anger to destroy the Whiteface, and he ultimately does destroy them all. So it is just this utter tragedy, this utter fall of a people, of a character, of a nation through its own depravity. And it's awful, but I think that is the point, that it is a warning to us as the reader that this can happen to anyone. I mean, the Whiteface Barghast, again, in Memories of Ice, was one of our, people that we didn't really know really well, but a lot of our heroes were from there, or were Barghast, or respected them as a people, and now to see where they end up here, even being led by someone like Tool for so long, is a parable to the reader. And I think this is a good bridge to talk and bring this whole video to a conclusion, talking about the theme of this book. The main theme, as I see it, as I've mentioned several times, is this idea of leaving a legacy behind us as we die, and caring for those things that we leave behind. And as an outpouring of that idea, the ultimate evil of extermination of a whole people and race and culture and thought, because that destroys not only the people that you are killing in that moment, but the entire history of that people, the immortality that they have achieved through living. And this is a storyline basically throughout all of the main plots that I just mentioned. Obviously, with the K'chain Shemal, they are on the verge of extinction and keep talking about the forgetting their way of life. We've already had this back in Reaper's Gale with the All, that they are also a people that are being exterminated and their way of life is being destroyed. The Sheikh are very much trying to get in touch with their past, and they are on the edge of extermination, are looking to that past to find meaning. Kalith herself personally says that she is the last of her people and her tribe because of their extermination at the hands of others. The K'chain Naruk, the reason that they attack is because they are desperate, because they are on the verge of extermination. Then, of course, a big theme in the Bone Hunters is that they are going to be unwitnessed. And I think what we're getting at with that idea is that they will do what is necessary, what is good, and actually forego that ultimate good thing of legacy for the greater good. And I think that's the powerful imagery that Adjunct Tavor and obviously Erikson is trying to give to us, like this, the ultimate virtue is to do something because it's right, not necessarily because it will be remembered. But at that very statement is recognizing the importance of being remembered, and of legacy, and of a people and persons together gaining an identity that is strong and gives meaning to life, and not allow it to unravel into meaninglessness, which is where evil and chaos awaits. Talking about history, we can talk about for a long time in this series, because that is very much a theme of Erikson talking about how history misleads, and also how history gives meaning. But I think it's key to recognize in this book in particular, it's not just history in a general concept, but it is a personal history that ties you to a people or a place or a country that in many ways gives you meaning and also pushes meaning on into the future. The ultimate tragedy is to lose that. And we see that in many different people in this book. And I think that's why it is titled Dust of Dreams. I think that's unfortunately the very sad theme of this book and why it is the most ponderous and the most brutal of books.
Hello, future Andy, butting in here. Sorry for the shaky cell phone cam in the middle of this, but as I was editing this review, I realized I had left out one of my favorite parts of Dust of Dreams, and that is the Deeth. You might not recognize that name, but you probably remember him. He is sort of the right-hand man to war leader Gaul. And if you remember right, we get a couple of perspectives sections from him. And he is this young leader, but he is war-weary. He doesn't really like war, but he's incredibly efficient. We hear a lot about how good a commander he is, and especially compared to a lot of the white-faced Barghast that at this point we have seen, we as the reader are so excited to get to know this guy who doesn't glorify in war, but simply fights because he has to. And he's this really great portrait of what a commander should be. And then just like Erikson in this beautiful postmodern critique, as we're getting to know this new hero, we hear secondhand that he dies in a battle where none of his other soldiers die, but he dies because his horse stepped in a snake hole and he was thrown from the horse and broke his neck and died. We don't even hear that. We don't see that happen. We don't see the battle. It's all off screen. We just hear this report given to war leader Gaul. And it's just so incredibly moving and powerful and a great example of, I think, what postmodern literary criticism has given to the genre. This pointed critique of war and really the folly of war and all that is around it. Not through just characters or plot or larger metaphors, but a tragic happening that doesn't fit within any sort of structural analysis of Dust of Dreams, which is why I missed it originally in my review, because it's hard to outline. But I think it's just a beautiful passage and idea from Erikson that I wanted to acknowledge in this review.
Moving on to happier things, well, I don't know if it's necessarily happy, but the end sequence in this book is the best battle we've had since Haitan way back in the Bone Hunters. It is phenomenal. This battle is described so well, and he's describing other creatures going against our Marines. So like the writing skill it takes to get my mind to be able to comprehend what the Kachin Naruk are doing in a battle against Malazan Marines and heavies, and yet I'm understanding all of the things that is taking place in the specifics is amazing. I love and hate the idea that this is just bad timing. I think this wraps up perfectly with the themes we've seen with Opan, the horrors of chance in many ways, leading to this terrible battle. And then, of course, as I already mentioned, this sort of final salvation we find in the Kachin Shamal and Kalith and Gesler and Stormy actually leading them to victory. That whole scene, which I don't know is like 200 pages long, is, again, since Haitan way back in Bone Hunters, is the last time I can remember having to turn the page that quickly and keep reading late into the night, early into the morning to finish, because it was just so compelling. So good, and it brought in so many elements that we had read about earlier into one scene, like the Azath house, the moon spawn, floating fortresses, all these things that, like, if we had just thrown them in randomly would have been crazy, but like we had background, and it just was also meaningful and well written and well done. It was great. If I had one small criticism, it's that the Kachin Naruk was not out of nowhere, but sort of, I don't know, it's just an odd enemy to have that we didn't have a lot of background in, but I think that was the point. And so I kind of loved and hated that sort of this big battle is coming out of chance with this enemy we really don't know much about, in this civil war that we weren't aware was happening, but happens right on top of our heroes. Loved and hated that, but I did think overall so good, and it really set us up for a great finale, and it is the only cliffhanger in the series. I mean, we're ending, and I don't know what happened to the Bone Hunters. I don't know if they exist, if they're dead. I don't know what happened to the Leather Soldiers. Are they dead? Is Briss dead? Is Fiddler alive? All these things I don't know at all. Tavor, we don't even know if she's alive. So Erikson hasn't done this to us before. Again, I think it's because this is a first part in a 2-part single work with that Dust of Dreams and the Crippled God are together. But it was great. Loved it. So overall, I said over on my spoiler-free review, I give this an 8 out of 10. As I'm talking about it, I'm second guessing that I gave it too low, because even though there's slow parts, such high heights in this book. Love it so much. Please comment down below with your thoughts of Dust of Dreams. Tell me about your read-through. Feel free to give spoilers. That's what this space is for. But please no series spoilers yet. You can do that over at the Crippled God review. Thank you. Please subscribe to this channel. First in, last out.